Okay, everybody, so let's talk about some of the external anatomy of the earthworm, which is probably one of the more important creatures that we'll study this year, and hopefully you'll learn why. So in your notes, you're going to need to label these particular structures here, 1 through 5. And let me show you probably an easiest way to do this. I'm going to minimize the screen a little bit. I'm going to go to your digital notebook, the OneNote notebook. And when I do that, I'm going to the second semester notes under my name. It'll be under your name. And then we're looking for this earthworm anatomy. So here's the same picture that was on the slide. And there's two ways you can do this. I think the easiest way is to type, but if you have a smart pen, you can do that. You can click on the pen up here in the left-hand corner, and you can write things on your actual notes, which I'm not very good at, so I don't really like using it. As you can see, those are the seti. The way I prefer to do it is to type, and so to do that you click on this icon in the top left hand corner that says type, double click where you want to type, and it'll bring up this entry box and you can type like normal. So number 1 is the prostomium. Number 2 is the clitellum. Okay, so that's a way that you can actually do these guided notes. And you can also, if you don't like where this is at, you can drag it and move it around, and you can use that same text entry box feature to fill out all of your notes. Okay, so let's go back to this. So these structures that you do need to label, and now remember, you can pause this video and label, on your own time, so that you're not too stressed that I'm going too fast. So number 1 right here in the anterior end is called the prostomium, which is not the mouth, but it covers the mouth. It's the first segment of the earthworm. Then there is number 2 right here is the clitellum. 3 is pointing to the seti, which we talked about yesterday. Those are those little bristles, those little hair-like structures that help it to move. 4 is the anus, and remember, none of the animals we've studied have had this, except for the nematodes. The sponges, the cnidarians, and the platyhelminthes all had only one opening in and out of the body, and so this is a feature that is a developmental importance, a developmental advantage over the previous groups. And then we also have the cuticle. We're going to be talking about all 5 of these things. Now, the earthworm, remember, they're segmented. That's these little ring-like structures that go the whole length of their body. And they usually have over 100 different segments if you count them. Now, let's talk about the prostomium. It's the first segment in the earthworm. It's right here, the very, very first segment. This is kind of a close-up view. Here's a far away view right here. Now it's in the front of the animal, so we'd say the anterior end, but it does not include the mouth, but it does sometimes cover. It's like a lip-like extension over the dorsal surface of the mouth. And it's almost sensory in nature. They use it to sense vibrations to kind of navigate their world. Now, the anus is found in the last segment of the body, and of course, we all know what that's for. That's to eliminate waste from the process of digestion. So you can see that right here. So we have the prostomium over here, anterior. The anus is posterior. Okay, now one of the more obvious features on the earthworm that you guys have all seen is this big band that's usually close to the middle. And this is called the clitellum. And the clitellum contains both the male and the female reproductive structures of this earthworm. The earthworm is hermaphroditic, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so here's a real world picture of it, and this band that you see right here that I'm circling, that's the clitellum. Now the setae, we talked about those yesterday, okay, those little bristles, those little hair-like appendages that help them to move. And the setae on earthworms are found on every body segment except for the first, so the prostomium, and the last, the anus. So in earthworms there are 4 pair of setae per segment. It's hard to see, you do need kind of a magnifying lens to usually see it. When I'm showing these in class, sometimes we can see these, sometimes we can't. We'll be making some live earthworm observations next week, and we'll see what we can see. But just as a reminder, they're used for movement. They anchor the worm in the ground as the longitudinal, I just said that wrong, longitudinal, so that's the lengthwise muscles, and the circular muscles contract and expand. So that's how it aids the animal in movement. Now the cuticle, and what the cuticle is it's a waxy outer covering on the worm. And this is very important for the worm, and we'll talk about how they breathe here in a second, because the cuticle is actually an important part to that. But it's important because it prevents water loss. It also helps gases to diffuse through the skin, so it helps its respiration. Now, a little bit more about the movement, because I just kind of went over that pretty quickly. So they have both circular and longitudinal muscles, and those muscles line the interior body wall of the earthworm. Now the setae, those bristles, those hair-like structures, those anchor the worm to the ground. The circular muscles contract, I'm having a hard time speaking today, I'm sorry, the circular muscles contract, making the earthworm longer, and the longitudinal muscles contract, making the earthworm shorter. Okay, so they'll use those in tandem with each other to propel themselves forward. Now we have this picture in your notes, and you're going to want to label all of these structures, and there's a lot, and you'll also see these in some of the observations that we make in class next week. So number 1 right here, those are the seminal receptacles for reproduction. Number 2 down here is the seminal vesicles. Number 3 is the sperm duct. Number 4 is the dorsal blood vessels. So remember that direction, dorsal, that's equivalent of like your back. So that's going to be the surface that faces up. Number 5 is that first body segment right there, the prostomium. Number 6 is the pharynx, and we talked about the pharynx with flatworms. Number 7 is essentially their heart. They don't have a true heart like you and I do, but they have something called aortic arches, and they have 5 of those. So you'll see 5 right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The esophagus is number 8, okay, connecting the mouth to the digestive system. Number 9 is something called the crop. Birds have crops and gizzards as well, and they use these, and they use muscular contractions to squish up their food as a process of the digestion. Number 10 is the gizzard. Then 11 is the intestine. 12 is that big band that you can see on the outside called the clitellum. And then, of course, we have the setae on the outside of the animal, these little hair-like structures, number 13. Okay, so if you need to pause the video, pause it so that you can label all those things. Now, feeding and digestion with these guys is actually really important to us all. Earthworms ingest soil as they burrow through it. Soil is sucked into the mouth by a muscular pharynx, and then it passes down the esophagus. The soil and the food enters the crop, which is a temporary storage area. And I suggest you keep your drawing out that you just did, that you just labeled in your guided notes so that you can look at where these structures are. The soil and food enters the crop, which is a temporary storage area like I just said. Now from the crop, soil moves into the gizzard. And the gizzard is thick and muscular. The gizzard grinds the soil, releasing and breaking up organic matter, which is an extremely important process to all life on this planet. As the soil passes through the intestine, digested organic compounds and nutrients from the soil are absorbed into the bloodstream, and then any undigested material is eliminated from the body through the anus. Now, earthworms' digestive system is extremely helpful to us, like I was just trying to say. So they fertilize the soil by taking in decaying organic matter and eliminating the waste. The burrows that they make when they go into the soil allow air to penetrate into the soil, and that brings oxygen to plant roots and other living organisms. Earthworms also loosen the soil, making it easier for plant roots to grow and for water to seep in. So anything that helps plants helps us all. Earthworms are an extremely important part to the ecosystems, all ecosystems on this planet. Now, they have something called a closed circulatory system. If you need a reminder of the circulatory system, I'll give you one in just a second. But organisms can have what we call a closed circulatory system or an open circulatory system. So let me tell you the difference. The blood in a closed circulatory system is contained within a system of blood vessels. Like you and I, we have a closed circulatory system. And this kind of circulatory system is found in all vertebrates, so animals with a backbone, as well as annelids, so segmented worms, and some mollusks. Now, an open circulatory system, just like the name implies, the blood is not inside blood vessels. It's open throughout the body cavity of the animal. And you're going to see this, and we'll study more about the open circulatory system when we look at arthropods and some other mollusks. So a lot of insects, all insects use the open circulatory system. So just a reminder, the purpose of a circulatory system is to move oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients and waste through the body of any animal, in this case the worm. Now their circulatory system, if we look at it a little bit closer, okay, it includes a dorsal blood vessel, okay. It also has a ventral blood vessel, so dorsal would be like on the top end of the worm, okay, like where your back is if you were crawling around on the ground, and ventral, remember, is like our belly, so for the worm it would be on the side facing the ground. And then they have those 5 pairs of those aortic arches that I pointed out to you in your first drawing, and here's one right here, here's another, another. Now, the ventral blood vessel takes blood to the posterior end of the body, so that's towards the rear. The dorsal blood vessel returns blood to the anterior end, so that's towards the head. Remember those directions from the first quarter. The aortic arches link the dorsal and ventral blood vessels near the anterior end. The contraction of those arches force blood through the circulatory system. So similar to our heart, so they contract, contract, contract. Or you could think squeeze, 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 and that creates like a pumping action that helps move that blood throughout the body. Now, as far as respiration and excretion, the respiratory system of the earthworms, they don't have any specialized organs for this process. And so that might make you think about a few different questions, like how are oxygen and carbon dioxide exchanged then if they don't have a specialized organ to do that? You've probably noticed that earthworms are really, really moist. Why? And then how does the skin stay moist? And then what are something called nephridia, which I'll explain in just a bit. So first of all, oxygen and carbon dioxide, they diffuse directly through the skin. So they're still using diffusion like the other animal groups that we've studied so far. Just under the skin is a series of very small blood vessels. The gases, once they move across the skin, they'll diffuse into these blood vessels. And then those aortic arches will help pump that blood through the dorsal and ventral vessels. Now the skin has to remain moist, and it has to remain moist for diffusion of gases to occur, for that oxygen and CO2 to be able to move back and forth. Gases can't diffuse across a dry surface. The skin is also covered by that cuticle that I showed you earlier, as well as mucus, so yes, snot, to keep it moist. And again, keeping moist is critical so that it can do diffusion of those gases so that it can breathe. Now those nephridia that I was talking about, those are excretory tubules, and they're found just under the skin, and that's what eliminates cellular waste and excess water that they don't need. Now, their nervous system, okay, is a little bit more complex than other animals that we've studied so far, but it's still pretty simple. Now, their nervous system consists of several ganglia and a ventral nerve cord. And I know you probably don't know what a ganglia is, but when you see that word, just think a mass of nervous tissue that serves as a very primitive brain, at least for the earthworm. Now, most body segments contain a single ganglion, but in the anterior end, several ganglia are fused together to form a brain, that concept of cephalization we've been talking about. The anterior brain processes information from simple stimuli such as light, touch, chemicals, moisture, temperature, vibrations. They don't really have any special sense organs, but they can use these ganglia to sense this kind of external information. Now, reproduction for this animal is fairly straightforward. They are hermaphroditic. That means that a single worm has both male and female reproductive organs, but even though they are a hermaphrodite, a single worm doesn't fertilize its own eggs. So they still use sexual reproduction, and they still use another partner to do that. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I know that's a long one. Remember, you can pause this video, come back to it, and you have some time to get these notes down. That's it. Bye.